And now, it's 10 a.m.
Let's just get down to it.
And it's time for your sports fix.
Strap yourselves in, folks.
From two guys who have covered the teams you're passionate about for years.
We are professionals.
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Jake Hatch filling in for Jake Scott today. What's going on, my man?
Not too much. How are you, buddy?
Doing well. Jake's out today and tomorrow. I'll be at the RV show tomorrow.
Are you going to the RV show?
I will be broadcasting live. Should be fun.
They're going to have you actually in an RV.
I hope so. Or I'll bring my own. I've got my little pop-up camper.
Yeah, you can roll your pop-up camper in there. And
as long as it's not raining and I have a generator, we'll get
go.
set up.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun tomorrow. But yeah, today, Jake Hatch filling in for Jake Scott for the next few hours. Jake will be back with us coming up next week as he is in Disneyland. You a Disneyland guy?
I am. But I am also married to, I call her a Disney-phile. Like, she is just, Disney is my wife's thing.
She knows it.
Yes. She grew up literally 10 minutes away from the gates of Disneyland in Southern California. So it's just been part of her life her entire life. And
it's baked in.
Now that she is forced to live in the hinterlands here in Utah, she gets back there as often as we can do it. But it's fun.
Sarah, when you were living in Florida, how often did you guys go?
When I was younger, we went all the time. Like, my mom had annual passes.
I was going to say, my wife grew up with annual passes.
Yeah, because my dad traveled a lot, and so then she would take my sister and I a ton. And then as I got older, it was like, okay, for your birthday, let's go, and you can bring, like, one friend. So we went a decent amount.
How many times will you go for the rest of your life?
It depends if I eventually get back to Florida or not. Because if I'm living in Florida, then I feel like I would go a little more frequently.
And if you have kids.
Yeah, and if I have kids. But yeah, because I have a few friends that work for Disney, so I could probably get a hookup. But living out of state, who knows?
Kind of out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, I kind of feel like I might go 5 more times for the rest of my life.
I'm terrified to even consider how many times I'm going to go the rest of my life just with my wife. So.
I like it. I enjoy it. I lived in Florida. We worked there. That's what you did. When you work at Disney World like I did, that's what you do. You go to Disney World. It's what happens in Orlando. There's really nothing else to do.
Well, and that makes sense. And here's the thing about this. Disney is a unique place unto itself. Once you get there, it just the whole dynamic changes. It's like so people talk like you can't be once you get there, it's a completely different feel to it, I think.
And as you've experienced, and Sarah would know, and I could tell you as well, it's one of those things you get a lot better at doing the more often you go.
Yes.
You get more efficient. You know, you go a one-off, you go one day, you honestly probably aren't going to have the best time.
No, you got to extend it out a little bit.
But you have a couple days there, and then you go a couple times in a row, and you kind of figure out like the rhythm and what to expect and what not to expect and what's going to cost money, which is everything. And
I was going to say.
You kind of do figure out how to get better at it, which is why I think people get so indoctrinated into the culture of it.
Well, you're dead on about this. And here's the thing. My wife, she is a person who will send me – she's into Reels, obviously, as most people are. A lot of people are TikTok. You do Reels. She sends me a lot of Disney ones. She's like, hey, what about this one? When we're looking ahead to a trip for that, and that's – you're right. You get kind of used to things. There's a dynamic to it all. And as you mentioned, you just kind of get used to the machinations, the overall what you need to do. You need to hit that. You need to go here, do this at this time of day, all that type of stuff. And it's part of the whole calculus of really life, it feels like, in a microcosm.
We will talk some Jazz basketball really throughout the day. It's the top of mind topic now.
There's only one topic bigger, though. Have you seen this morning the big announcement?
I did.
EA Sports College Football 2025 is on its way.
We knew it was coming.
Yeah.
People thought it was going to happen in 2024. If you are a millennial male, you have played either Madden or EA Sports College Football.
Or both, like me.
Or both.
Yeah.
So you're familiar with this. And, of course, Madden never went away because they didn't have any problem with NIL.
they had an agreement with the players and everything. Yes, yeah.
And then college football when was the last time they had a college football video?
It was in 2013. It was NCAA 2014 is the last edition. So this will be 11 years later. It will be the next edition of it. Now this one's being rebranded. It's just going to be EA College Football, I believe.
Okay.
It used to be EA Sports NCAA Football because NCAA had a license with this. It's similar to what EA Sports did. You remember they had EA FIFA for so long,
yep.
FIFA Soccer. Well, now it's just EA FC. FIFA pulled their willingness to have the license on it.
Okay.
So EA said, okay, well, we'll just license our own deal.
Right. Yeah, just cut out the middleman, which is fine. This will be a big deal for a lot of people. This will be especially with the modern systems that are out.
Yes.
And you can actually use the players' names, right? I mean, that's part of the agreement.
That's the expectation, yes. The biggest thing is that all these reports, Matt Brown from Extra Points Newsletter, we have him on the station quite often across all the shows. He has been like on the forefront of all this. Like
yes,
he's getting all kinds of reports on it. The biggest thing is there is a move to make sure that players have to sign an NIL deal to have their name in the game. There was some thought early on that players would hold out, big name players. Here's the thing. To a man, speaking of players, I've talked to college football players. Any one of them have said, I cannot wait to have that game back, and I cannot wait to see my name in the game.
All these kids played it. These kids right now who are in college who are 18, 19, 20, 21 were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and we're playing
and they
this.
Downloaded the rosters with the names so they could have the names in the game. They've wanted nothing more their entire lives to see their name up there in the game as well. So I'm expecting this is going to absolutely roll on through. They're saying that a full reveal coming up in May, and then the expectation the game will be released this summer.
It is coming at an ideal time for Utah moving into the Big 12, where I can buy the game and I can learn all the players in the Big 12 on every single team and what they're good at and what they're not good at, which is something I did when I had to start covering soccer and MLS, which was I did. I went and bought FIFA, and you just play a full MLS season. You're like, oh, well, this team's good and this team's bad and this team has these players. And it honestly is a really good way to learn some of the ins and outs and then really names, coaches, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and see, here's the thing. I've covered the Big 12 pretty closely this year, just doing what I do with BYU. And I'll admit, Ben, it's been a learning process because BYU stepped out of independence back into a conference, and it was and we've talked about this on the station all the time. The nomadic style of BYU football seasons during independence was one thing. Now that you're going to have these associations with these teams, and by the way, there's 4 more, as you mentioned, Utah coming in with Colorado and the Arizona schools. There is a whole lot of the Big 12 that is still being learned about, and it's going to take some time. And I'm with you. I'm going to play that game with one thought that it's going to help me associate, okay, X player here at this school is a standout player, get to know that name. It's going to help in both realms, just simply the fact that I love that game, and it's going to be entertainment for me, but at the same time helping me do what I do here in radio.
It does just take a little while. It's just why I've liked doing the Big 12, Pac-12 power poll and to reveal how the sausage is made. Part of that was just to get familiar with who is playing well in the in the different leagues and who's not playing well and what to expect coming up, so we can cover it better day to day. That was a fun way to just kind of dip your toe and get used to it and recognize who these people are and who the quarterbacks are and who the running backs are and who the difference makers are. But you get a couple of years covering these guys in a row, and it's really easy to track USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, because we've been covering them for a decade, and they make a little addition here, they get a transfer there. We recognize what that will mean. It's hard to do that moving into an entirely new conference and recognizing what they've done well, because we just haven't had to cover it.
Well, and that's the thing about this is there's institutional knowledge from a decade plus of Pac-12 with Utah being in it that you just pick up along the way. Well, guess what? We're year 1 for BYU. It's going to be year 1 for Utah coming here in the Big 12. And it's going to take 2, 3, 4 years to really kind of get the feel of the flow of how this conference is going to go. But that's just, as I mentioned, there's institutional knowledge that comes from the association of this. And it was fun to have the Pac-12, and it's just incredible, by the way, still into my mind to think that the Pac-12 is going away. It's just boggles my mind because we grew up here in the West, and the Pac-12 is just part of the sports universe out this way. But the time that it will take to get up to speed with the Big 12, it's not going to be time that's wasted. It's just there's just a familiarity you have to develop.
It is interesting, and I've not seen this written anywhere, and it would probably be really hard to track. And the NFL's always been king. I'm not trying to pretend that it's responsible for why the NFL is king, but I bet you there is a major part of kids like you and I, when we were children, growing up playing Madden in our formative years in high school, junior high, when they started to become good and you could actually recognize, like, it wasn't 8-bit, 16-bit Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
Like, once they started getting pretty advanced, where it has kept an interest in the NFL from our demographic that may have waned slightly, or certainly more than it has, if we didn't have access to that type of game. It just gives you a familiarity with the game, the teams, the players, strategy, etc., that you may have not gotten had you not literally spent hundreds or thousands of hours playing these games with your friends and bonding, and then it becomes ingrained in who you are as you get older.
There's been some concern over the years from the NFL, and this is like the minorest of minor concerns for them because they're just printing money at this point, but they've talked about the fact that these guys wear helmets. Their faces aren't as recognizable as in NBA circles.
Right.
LeBron James, here you locally, Lowry Market, you know the face because there's nothing covering it.
Right.
Well, guess what? College football games and EA Madden did is that they took the helmet off the guys, and you guys see the face, and you associate that. Like, okay, now I know Brett Favre.
Yep.
Now I know Steve Young over here. In this day and age, Aaron Rodgers. You get to know and you're right. It absolutely associates that sport, that game of our similar age. It's absolutely a big dynamic.
So I'll be curious if the college football video game coming back reignites. Not that college football needs a lot of help, but I think with our recognition that college football over the next decade is going to change to a point where it might become somewhat unrecognizable from what it is today, and already is unrecognizable from what it was 10 or 15 years ago, with NIL, with the transfer portal, with the P5, which is now going to be the P4, I guess, and how the college football playoff, all these things that have changed. I wonder if having continuity of a yearly video game that people buy into, if they make it the right way, if they do it well, will reinvigorate some of the interest in college football for a younger generation that will stop kids from saying, "Oh, well, I just care about the NFL," or "I'm going to go to basketball and care about the NBA." I'll be curious what type of impact that has, and I think those are weird big deals. The same way I think FIFA has integrated the EPL and international soccer into the minds of Americans, because everyone I know plays FIFA soccer.
Well, yeah, generation below us, absolutely. Like I have a younger brother that I'm those 7 kids. There's 6 boys in the family, and the 3 brothers just younger than me. We're all of this EA college football Madden era, which college football and NFL football is our thing. Well, my younger siblings beyond that, my sister and my other 2 brothers, they look at it much different, Ben. It's like, football's cool and all, but my youngest brother, I can tell you for sure, that he played American football growing up, but EA FIFA, like that video game, man, he is as well-versed in, it feels like EPL soccer, La Liga, the German Bundesliga, as well as MLS because of FIFA, and it's a pretty master stroke of genius by EA Sports and FIFA to do that, because it has got a generation of gamers who are upcoming, who, by the way, are coming up pretty quick and are starting to have that disposable income. And oh, by the way, where's the next World Cup going to be?
Yep.
Here in the United States,
Jersey.
Canada, the finals in New Jersey. That's awesome.
And you know what? Another place you can see it, and again, not to get too lost in video game conversations today, because I'm not trying to overdo it on that conversation. I know it doesn't apply to everybody, but look at what happened. This hits close to home for me with skateboarding from what it was in the early 90s, which was this counterculture. It was only the kids who smoked cigarettes in high school who had skateboards. And now there's a skate park every 6 blocks. Every kid under 25 has a skateboard.
It's mainstream, yeah.
And it's solely going back to the Tony Hawk Pro Skater video game, because everybody played it and everyone thought it was easy, and so everyone bought a skateboard, and it revolutionized it for everybody.
Yes.
It made it accessible the same way these video games make college football accessible, the NFL accessible, even the NBA. And while those were so mainstream, the NFL and NBA, it does require a little bit more niche to get into soccer, a little more niche to get into college football, a little more niche to get into skateboarding and those types of sports. And video games put it in their hands. It educates the kids about the terminology, the different moves in football or skateboarding or soccer or whatever, the strategy, and you figure that out. And so I think that's interesting. I think I will be curious how it impacts college football going forward.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, but I do think in some way it will reignite some of the passion, as it were, for college football. And you're right, college football doesn't need a ton of help because it's so localized, especially here. Trust me, between this as well as I do, BYU, Utah, and even Utah State, and you can go down to the FCS schools. There is loyalty built in just because you went to those universities and you want to support the old alma mater, as it were. But the thing about this is it's going to, I think, help, I guess, in a way, nationalize college football as well. Maybe bring more brand names, kids on the East Coast getting to know more about USC, Oregon, etc., whereas kids out here in the West probably getting to know more about the Penn States of the world, the Miamis once again. It's going to be really, really fun to have that. And here's the thing. We work in an industry that we rely on people having the passion for the sport. Well, guess what? If video games, because you mentioned Tony Hawk brought skating into the mainstream, you also can add, what was the BMX one that was Matt Hoffman's BMX, did that as well. FIFA has done it for soccer. This is, I think, the next thing. It's just going to bring college football, which was already a generation ago a thing. It brings it back to a new generation, and it can reignite, I think, some sports fandom and some passion for sports, which in turn benefits us.
If we've sold you on EA Sports College Football 25, you can go check it out at KSLSports.com. Yeah. We have an article up. It's got the teaser and things. So, it's interesting. I'm sorry that's not where we really meant to lead off, but it's a big topic, and it is obviously it is moving the needle. It's all over Twitter this morning. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into the top 3 stories. We'll talk Utah Jazz basketball, both their loss last night, getting ready tonight. We should look through and look forward to the All-Star break coming up next. So stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
It's time to break down the biggest stories of the day. Let's go. This is the top 3 stories of the day on KSLSports.com. 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
I've seen all good people turn their heads each day, so satisfied I'm on my way.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Ben Anderson, Jake Hatch filling in for Jake Scott today. I always appreciate my man Jake Hatch filling in.
Happy to do it.
Let's get to the top 3 stories at KSLSports.com, brought to you by J. Brooks Jewelers. You can find them at 2 locations up and down the Wasatch Front. You can also find them online, jbrooksjewelers.com. And if you're like me, you're not celebrating Valentine's Day until this weekend. Maybe you were at the Jazz game last night working. It's not too late. Go check out J. Brooks, jbrooksjewelers.com. All right, Sarah, number 1.
Number 1, the Jazz lose to the Lakers.
It was ugly. They fought hard through the first half, 70-69 at the break. I thought, okay, Jazz come out in the third quarter. Lakers are going on the All-Star break. If you can jump on them, you might be able to get them to quit. Jazz score the first 5 points of the half. I thought, okay, maybe they're going to do it. Close through midway through the third quarter, and then Anthony Davis says, oh, enough of you, all Jazz players, and took over. And the Lakers ran away with a very easy victory.
Well, here's the thing. We played some of the highlights this morning on DJ and PK, and it was like the first half was Rui Hachimura. He was going off. It was his career high, if I'm not mistaken, 36?
36, yep.
And so he's going off in the first half, and the Jazz withstood that punch. You're right. They were hanging in there. You're like, okay, they're punching back. They come out in the third quarter. You're like, okay, yeah, I thought that had similar thought to you. It was like, okay, maybe, just maybe, the Lakers are going to be like, you know what? Screw it. It's break time, whatever. Yep. Well, and then Anthony Davis is like, yeah, no. We're gonna win this game. He goes for 30. He went for 36 and 15 as well. 37 and 15, and just runs away with it. And that's the thing. This was a game. It was 84-all, if I recall correctly, Ben. And then the Lakers just put a run on the Jazz in the final few minutes of that third quarter. And I think that said everything we needed to know about that game. It's like, okay, the Jazz fought. The Lakers said, yeah, enough of this. Game over.
They continue to have issues defensively. The Jazz do, especially against opposing front courts, because the Jazz front court right now isn't very good defensively as they're trying to figure out how to play Walker Kessler and John Collins and Lauri Markkanen again. And Will Hardy had solved that, it seemed like, somewhat midway through the season. And then he lost Kelly Olynyk. So it's back to the drawing board, and you've got to readjust your rotations. And the Lakers shoot 57% from the floor and 45% from 3. I mean, you're not going to win a game that way. And they sure didn't. Jazz shot 48%, only knocked down 31% of their threes. They had some good looks. They had some bad looks. Taylor Hendricks still trying to figure out when he has a green light to shoot. He thinks it's all the time, and it's not. Will Hardy even said after the game, what we need Taylor to do is to use his athleticism and his hustle to dig out 50-50 balls, grab rebounds, And instead, he was taking shots. And again, it's what he's been doing the last 2 years.
Yeah, I was going to say. It's
Central Florida let him shoot because it was their best shot every time, to let their 6'10" kid who has good touch shoot threes. And then I'm sure with the Stars, they said, hey, get some shots up, see how it feels. We're trying to, recognize what you can do, turn you into a perimeter player instead of so much of a back-to-the-basket player. And it just did not. He's got to unlearn some of those things now. He's got to figure out how to play within the system. Probably needs to take 2 threes a game, not 6 threes a game.
I was listening to David Locke last night, and this is on his postcast, if I recall correctly, from Locked On Jazz. And him and Ron Boone were talking about the fact that you can see the Taylor Hendricks potential there. It shows up.
Yeah, no question.
But the problem is it's 2 years away from really coming into fruition, and that's the concern I think that most Jazz fans have, is if this guy is 2 years away from really contributing, why did you take him so early in the draft? But you're playing him now to get a look at what you got. And that's the thing. The trades that the Jazz made, yes, there's the reports out there that Jazz players may feel let down by the front office, etc. But this is a Jazz front office led by Danny Ainge, Justin Zanuck, and obviously Ryan Smith as the owner is right in the mix of this. They want, as they've talked about, to build a championship contender. Now, the way they're going about it, I think, has irked a lot of Jazz fans, Ben, and you know this better than I do because I know you're covering this day in and day out. But I also understand that they have a vision for what they want to accomplish here, and the trades they executed at the trade deadline, yes, it significantly weakened this team. It's readily apparent on that front.
Yep.
But they needed to get a look at what Hendricks has got. They need to get some looks at Bryce Sensabaugh. They need to give more time to Keontae George to see, are these guys legitimate pieces that can be part of this build we're going towards? And yeah, it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be ugly. It ain't going to be fun at points, but it's kind of the reality of what we're dealing with right now.
They will look better when they come back from the All-Star break. Taylor Hendricks will get a couple of more practices under his belt just to understand what's going on. Again, I think he was with the Stars on Wednesday. The trade deadline was Thursday, and I think he played Thursday night against the Suns. Now, the Jazz did have a little bit of an extended weekend, and Taylor Hendricks got to practice on Saturday because they didn't play either Friday or Saturday, so the Jazz got some practice time in there. But even then, it's a different role than he was playing with the Stars. So I suspect you will see him playing better before the end of the year. In fact, I thought he looked better in mid-December than he did over these last 3 games that he's played. So he will figure it out. I have no doubt about that. I think he will find a better role and get a little less antsy, which is how he looks right now when he's playing. He'll be like, I'll dribble, and he'll just start dribbling, or I'll just shoot, and I'll just shoot. And when
you can tell
he can slow down. You can slow down. The game will slow down. Catch the ball. If you don't know what to do, pass it again. That's the easiest solution for him, and I think he'll start doing that.
Young players at all levels, no matter what sport you play, they get too in their head. They're thinking too much. Yep. And coaches talk all the time that there comes a maturation point that all of a sudden it's like, hold on, this is old hat. Like, you haven't forgotten how to play basketball.
Right.
But you're playing at a different level, and you're playing against better athletes, and the speed of the game is faster, and it takes some time to adjust to that. And you can tell, you can almost like figuratively see the gears grinding there, and you're like, and it's called, I need to do this. It's like, eventually it comes to a point where you're like, oh, okay, I got to go here, I got to go there. Like it's going to take time, and yes, it's not going to look smooth for the first little bit, but eventually, well, at least fingers crossed that it pans out. That all of a sudden it's like, oh, it clicks. Okay, we're good.
It's like everybody's first few days at work.
Oh,
it feels weird. It feels awkward. You don't know what you're doing. You think you're doing it all wrong. Month or 2 in, you start getting ready for it. You start feeling more prepared, and I think we will see that from Taylor Hendricks. But yes, the physical tools are outstanding. I mean, the way his ability to jump up and snare rebounds and move the floor is really pretty impressive. And then when the threes go in, they look good. They don't go in at a high rate right now, but you can see the release looks good when it does go in.
Yeah.
And now Will Hardy's got to figure out the rest of his rotations. I think one of the things I've noticed over the last 3 games is they have those maybe first 24 minutes figured out. They're competitive. And then at some point, just to get to the end of the game, he has to stretch a couple of these 5-man lineups he's playing, whether it's they're weird ones. It's like Chris Dunn, Talen Horton-Tucker, Taylor Hendricks, Walker Kessler, and then you name it, John Collins or Jordan Clarkson or whoever it is.
Yeah.
And it's just not a good enough lineup. And in 5 minutes, they get absolutely killed like they did at the end of the third quarter last night, and the game is over.
Yeah.
He will figure out how to avoid those lineups, how to keep more competitive lineups on the floor, because while I'm not sure the Jazz are all that heartbroken by losing these games, they don't want to be down 25 in the fourth quarter to where the minutes don't really matter, because then you're not actually helping Taylor Hendricks as much as you would like to playing in these high leverage situations, having Keontae George continuing to play in these, winnable game situations where they actually learn the importance of every possession.
Well, and we're going to have Locke on here in a little bit. He talks all the time. You have to find 240 minutes. And right now the Jazz, they're well short of that number. And that's to your point, is they're throwing lineups that are out there that they play past their effectiveness point, and it's crippling right now.
All right, Sarah, let's get to number 2. Oh, by the way, Jazz in action tonight against the Golden State Warriors. Warriors did sound like they're traveling all their players.
That's what the report was last night. So, and I was there Monday night watching Steph do his thing, and he was dynamic in that fourth quarter. We'll see if he does it again tonight.
And after their loss last night to the Clippers, they're going to want to make sure they go into the break with a victory because they gave one away yesterday.
Number 2, the 49ers fired their defensive coordinator.
This was a little bit surprising for some, especially after Steve Wilkes, the DC in San Francisco, had a pretty good performance in the Super Bowl. I mean, you had 19 points from Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in regulation. That should be good enough, in all honesty, to win that game.
It should. And a lot of people are saying that this is like Steve Wilkes taking the fall for Kyle Shanahan. And I get that thought process with this. But as a guy who I have watched more than my fair share of 49ers football this year, is that Steve Wilkes, his defenses ran too hot or too cold at times. There was no kind of baseline. Now, DeMeco Ryans, who was the defensive coordinator preceding him, who went down to Houston and engineered an incredible turnaround this season, his defense, there was a consistency factor that was lacking with Steve Wilkes. So, yes, I understand that people are going to look at the Steve Wilkes thing and say, he's the fall guy for Kyle Shanahan's failures.
And he only got 1 year, right?
He only got the 1 year because it was just 1 year here. And that's what I think a lot of people are very upset about, because Steve Wilkes is very well liked across the NFL. It's one of those people out there that people absolutely love. But I think the situation is that Kyle Shanahan has come to expect a consistency level from what is one of the elite defenses in the NFL, and it was so up and down all season long. There were, like I said, very hot stretches and very cold stretches, especially with that defensive line, which is one of the more vaunted defensive fronts in the league. I think it's more of a season-long thing, I think, than it is, simply you fell once again with another double-digit lead in the Super Bowl, Kyle Shanahan, and you need to have a fall guy. I don't think it's that. I think it's that Kyle Shanahan wants more consistency from his defense, top to bottom, across the board all season long. That's why Steve Wilkes was fired.
Well, they have the talent.
They do.
They have the talent on the defensive side of the ball.
They've invested so much in that defense.
So there shouldn't be an enormous drop-off, even if they perform worse next year than they did under Steve Wilkes.
And part of this goes on the players too, by the way.
If the 49ers are worse next year than they are this year, there's a real chance that Shanahan's out.
Oh, and here's the thing. Pressure is being ratcheted up on Kyle Shanahan. There's no doubt about that. He's had 3 double-digit leads at points in the Super Bowl and has lost every single one of them.
Yeah.
Guess what? You want that label attached. You don't want that label of not being able to get it done attached to you. And the problem is the window for the 49ers right now is very small, because they've got this quarterback who is on an incredible deal. $800,000 has allowed you to spread the wealth around to everybody else around him with Brock Purdy there. Now, that window is going to end in the next 2 years. Can you get over the hump? And the issue is, you look at the AFC and you got a quarterback by the name of Patrick Mahomes who has beaten you twice in the past 5 years for Super Bowl titles you thought were rightfully yours.
And good young teams are cheap still. There are other younger teams that are also cheap. And while you may not be paying the quarterback, everybody else needs money. Yeah. And that's why you have the best left tackle, you have the best linebacker,
you're able to
you have one of the best tight ends. Those guys end up getting paid more and more and more, and even if you have the cheap quarterback, you start losing players. So I will be curious to see what happens with the 49ers. Yeah, Shanahan does afford himself another year. You go to the Super Bowl, you deserve another year. But if they underperform next year, or he blows another big playoff lead,
there's a hangover effect, he's
going to be out.
Yeah, and here's the thing. Him and John Lynch came in together, but you have to divorce yourself if you're John Lynch from that. And Jed York, their owner, obviously, he's very invested as well. Yeah, if it goes off the rails a little bit next year, absolutely. I could see Kyle Shanahan paying the ultimate price and losing that gig.
It'll be interesting to see which direction they go.
Yeah,
with this defensive coordinator now.
Yeah, there's some thought that Brandon Staley, the former Chargers coach, who, let's put it this way, not a good head coach, but his track record as a defensive coordinator, pretty strong.
And he's in the analytics bubble that Kyle Shanahan also belongs to.
Absolutely.
So I think those two could go hand in hand, and that would make some sense. I think that's probably a pretty good prediction. Sarah, number 3.
Number 3, NBA All-Star Weekend's coming up.
Fun news tomorrow night for the Utah Jazz as Keontae George and Walker Kessler are in action in the Rising Stars Challenge. They will actually play each other in the first round of the Rising Stars Challenge. So if you have TNT and you're interested in watching that, you don't have to hope that both of their teams would win in the semifinals to get to the finals to face one another. They will play each other in the first round. It is a 3-game tournament. So there's 4 teams that come in. It's Team Jalen Rose, Team Tamika Catchings. I can't even remember the other 2 that have been drafted.
Yeah.
I can pull them up. But regardless, that's who both Keontae George and Walker Kessler are playing for. Walker is on Team Jalen. Keontae George is on Team Tamika. I think Team Jalen has the best team. They've got a bunch of sophomores, and they're really good.
Now, here's the thing with this. This is the right way to approach this type of dynamic because I remember they played it was a rookie-sophomore game for so many years, and then they went to this Rising Stars Challenge where it was the rookies versus sophomores still. I actually like the tournament format of this where it sets up a little more competition. It's All-Star Weekend, so let's be real. We're not going to get
high-level play.
Yeah, you're not going 110%, but the fact that there is pride on the line, it adds, I think, a little bit of an element of intrigue to it, which helps, I think, attract some extra eyeballs that otherwise would be like, Rising Stars Challenge? Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah.
By the way, are they going to be playing on that new court as well with the Rising Stars Challenge?
I'm not sure. So there's a new LED court.
Glass court?
I would bet they don't. I bet they wait to debut that.
They said Saturday night is going to happen.
Saturday night. Yeah. Maybe they'll do it Sunday, but or on Friday, I should say. I doubt it. I think that probably makes more sense for Saturday night and then what they do on Sunday.
Sure.
But yeah, these tournament games, you play to 40 in the semifinals, and then once you get to 40, the championship game, I think you play to 25.
Something to that effect, yeah.
So it's goofy. Walker Kessler was on with Jeremiah Jensen on TV and was kind of joking about how goofy it is and pretending that he was showing Keontae George the ropes. But you know what I do firmly believe? I think it matters to have your guys at these events. I think it matters to be within the group because the NBA is really cliquey. And I know there's only 450 players, and we kind of think they would all know each other. There is a group of the have-beens and the never-weres, and the it guys and the not it guys. And being at All-Star Weekend is a good way to become one of the it guys. So having Walker Kessler there, having him go to USA Basketball, having Keontae George there, having Larry Markkinen there competing in the three-point shooting contest on Saturday night, those are all little tiny positives that are a part of familiarity, selling Utah's brand, having guys, I like Keontae. I met him that weekend. I would be willing to go play with him in Utah. Or I like Walker. I like what he does. I could see myself playing with him in Utah. I do think those things matter. It's one of the reasons why Gordon Hayward wanted to get there so badly and was such a weirdo when he didn't.
Oh, jeez.
It matters. It matters to those guys.
It does, and they want to be a part of this because they've grown up. We talked about this earlier. Like there's a generation that grew up and they've watched their favorite players play on All-Star Weekend and participate in these events. So the opportunity to do that, the Rising Stars Challenge is not going to blow anybody away. But you're right. Going to get to know guys, going to let people know a little bit more about Utah just by the way that they're playing in this game. And I think as if you're the Jazz ownership / brain trust, you absolutely want as many guys in that consciousness to be there. And we'll see how they do because you're right. The Rising Star Challenge is not going to draw the major eyeballs. But Larry Markkinen in the three-point shootout, he could do a really, really good job there. And people are going to be like, oh, yeah, he was an All-Star last year. And he played at Utah. Like, that is what the good that can come out of a weekend like this.
That's your top 3 stories at KSLSports.com. Again, you can always read them at KSL Sports, brought to you by our friends at J. Brooks Jewelers. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue to break down more Jazz basketball, including David Locke joining us at 11 o'clock. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Segment brought to you by Peach Doors and Windows. Peach Doors and Windows is Utah's premier window and door retailer, combining beauty and technology on windows and doors since 1993. Call them today for your free in-home estimate, 801-566-1255. Hey, tomorrow I'm going to be at the RV show. We want to get you hooked up with a 5-pack of tickets to the RV show at the Mountain America Expo Center, your one-stop marketplace for every kind of outdoor recreational vehicle. Tickets are still available, but get a 5-pack right now, 801-575-ZONE, 801-575-ZONE, or you can find them online, UtahRVShow.com. What, 12th caller through? Why do we always do 12? Why did 12 become the number?
Back,
you know this better
back
than I
when
do.
we had some previous branding, that 1280.
Oh,
So-
I say we do 80th caller.
We've had that debate over the years. Should we, like those big contests, we do 80 callers, and us as producers, I'm like, no,
Thank you.
I'm not answering 80 calls.
12's plenty. Hey, Sarah, what's your go-to hang up on people? Like, how do you answer for our non-winners? What do you say?
We know Lloyd Coles.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, like, what the first caller who calls through, would you say you're caller number 1, and then you just
Yeah,
hang up
I
on
just
him?
say caller 1, caller 2, caller 3.
Okay, it's cold.
Yeah.
Cold business.
Well, I'm not going to sit there and have a conversation with 11 different people before I get to caller 12.
Yeah,
I'm
you don't
sorry.
have time.
Thanks so much
I
for
don't have
calling
time
in.
for
By the way,
that.
you didn't win, but how's your day going?
Yeah. Just curious. I've been back there. I've done it too.
But there has been, like, sometimes if you won tickets recently, you can't win the next ones. So then I feel bad. So then I'll say, like, we appreciate you listening, you know?
Hey,
Keep calling.
rules are rules.
Yeah, I can't control
they're there
that.
for a reason. No, you want to mix it up. We want to make sure everyone has a chance to win. So your chance to win a 5-pack of tickets. David Locke's going to join us coming up in about 10 minutes. I believe he's on the top of Snowbird right now with his father. He told me, or wherever he's skiing. So
he'll be at the lodge.
he'll be at the lodge, or
Okay.
he'll just be
On the slopes.
at coming right off the slopes. Yeah,
Here's the thing. He's going to have incredible cell coverage.
yeah.
Like some of those resorts, like you can get up there and it is, you can be 10,000 feet in the air and it is crystal clear.
It's ugly today though. It's gray out there.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
Let's put it. It's not one of those quote unquote bluebird days today.
No, by no means. All right, let's we'll talk a little more Jazz basketball coming up with Locke then, but we can talk about the Jazz game last night. And I want to do this at 11:30. I want to go through the rest of the Jazz schedule and figure out how many wins we think they have, because what becomes interesting, and one of the things that Jake Scott has said a lot, is that, you know, if the Jazz try for the rest of the year, he thinks they can make the play-in tournament. The hard part for the Jazz right now, if you look at the NBA standings, in the Western Conference, the teams in front of them have to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
The Warriors can't pull their foot off the pedal, right?
No.
You're in the waning years of Steph. You're absolutely at the end of what you're getting from Klay Thompson.
And
Draymond's
Draymond.
still like a top 10 defensive player, but
He's a psycho.
not one of the 15 best players in the NBA like he was in his prime. Mm-hmm. So they've got to make the playoffs, and they're sitting at 500. So the Warriors are not going to pull their foot off the pedal, barring a very significant injury to Steph. The Lakers are certainly not going to pull their foot off the pedal. They've won 3 in a row. They've won 7 of their last 10. They just bought at the trade deadline by signing Spencer Dinwiddie after the waiver. They want to get there. The Kings are only now just touching success for the first time in 20 years.
Jeez.
Some people's entire lives.
Vlade Divac wants a word, yeah, but that shows you how long it's been.
And by the way, the Kings are 5.5 games ahead of the Jazz with 27 games left to play. Like, you don't make up that much room on anybody unless the Kings were to have absolutely collapsed.
Either you're falling flat on your face or you get just incredibly hot. But
And I don't see the Jazz doing that.
Yeah.
I don't see the Jazz playing better now than they did between mid-December and, the end of January. So I think that's a tough ask. So the only teams you're really even competing to catch are the Warriors and the Lakers, and they're both trying to make it, and they have more talent than you do.
Yeah.
So that's the issue for the Jazz. So maybe at 11:30 when we do this and we walk through their schedule, you start to recognize, like, at what point do the Jazz fully pull the plug, which they did over the last 11 games of the season. Last year, I think Lauri Markkanen only played 3 times, just kind of in spot minutes. Do the Jazz get to that point where they just say, again, it's about maximizing draft positioning, you're resting Lauri Markkanen,
yeah.
I don't know if the Jazz have anybody actually going to the Olympics now after trading Kelly Olynyk. I need to look at who is qualified, and there still are some qualifying.
Simone also got traded. So yeah, he's the Italian. Did the Italians even make it? But yeah, you're right.
Finland's not there.
Yeah.
Walker's not going to be with the Americans.
No.
So-
He'll go to camp with them, but he's not going to make the actual final roster. So yeah. Here's the thing, Ben. You and I have talked about this off air. Is that we all know that the Jazz have that top 10 protected pick that conveys over to Oklahoma City. Now, if you look at the draft projections of the top of the draft, it's like this week this guy's the top pick. The next week there's no really consensus top tier talent. It feels like in this NBA draft. I've got some thought that the Jazz would very much like to convey that pick if at all possible, but you're right. At some point here, do you pull the plug and essentially just say, we hope we landed 11 in the lottery? Like, because if it's in the top 10, you keep it.
Yep.
So I feel like I can kind of see both sides of this for this team, because I see where Jake was coming from when he said if they want to make the play-in, they can do it. But to your point, the teams in front of them have to make it. Like, they have to.
And now the Jazz are only a game and a half ahead of the 10th seed in the NBA, or the bottom 10 seeds. So the Jazz are a game and a half away from the Houston Rockets, who the Rockets are falling apart right now as we are watching midway through the season.
Correct.
They're 3-7 in their last 10. If they were to start winning a couple of games, they could overtake the Jazz relatively easily. Atlanta is trying to win because they are trying to hold on to that 10th seed in the East so they can make the play-in tournament. They could also jump the Jazz. They're only 2 games back. And then the Brooklyn Nets are pretty far back, 4.5. In all honesty, like, the Jazz are either best case scenario going to have like the 12th worst record or the 9th worst record in the NBA. There's just not a lot of movement outside of it.
And then it's a crapshoot because it's the lottery.
Yeah, and then you're probably drafting 9th or 10th, which maybe that's what Danny Ainge wants. And you're not. That doesn't mean you're drafting. It means you have another asset to trade this summer if you want to trade the 9th pick or the 10th pick, which I could very much see happening. Or you get the 11th pick and you convey it to Oklahoma City, which is actually probably the worst case scenario because you've given them the highest pick possible they could get if you give them to number 11.
And see, that there is so much that is yet to be answered, but I think it adds a level of intrigue to the final stretch run here, Ben, at the same time. Because, yes, we all know that this Jazz team is not the same team as it was before the NBA trade deadline, and they won't be, frankly, the rest of the way. But the whole, okay, what's the thought process here of what the Jazz are trying to accomplish here? And to your point, when do they ultimately decide, you know what, these other teams are too far in front of us, let's pull the plug on this right now, and we'll just kind of close up shop? It's going to add a whole level of intrigue to this season that, with a team that could very well end up below 500, still could be worth watching very keenly because there's a lot that can move.
There's still a narrative. There's still a conversation around them. All right, let's talk to David Locke about that very thing coming up next. Stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Who's got it better than us?
Your home for the best sports coverage in Utah. You're listening to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Welcome in, David Locke, brought to you by Bucked Up Energy. Real ingredients, real focus, unreal energy. Visit buckedup.com to find your local retail store and mention the code KSL in-store to get your free energy drink with no purchase necessary. He is the radio voice of the Utah Jazz. It is David Locke. What's going on, David?
Not much. Ben Anderson, how are you?
Are you where we thought you were going to be? Are you on top of a mountain?
Yeah, I have not, unfortunately, yes, but I'm in the van. I have not left yet. I've got work things and prep for a game. So my dad is here, hopefully doing well. He's 84 and skiing a powder day, and he's great unless he has to walk in ski boots. So we try to help him out as much as we can.
We've been able to digest last night's loss for about 12 hours, 3 games post-trade deadline. What are your thoughts on where they are?
Yeah, Will Hardy kind of foreshadowed it, said things would be messy for a little while, and I think that's true. Like, I think that it's been a little messy. I thought we saw some signs. You mentioned the post game of things getting a little less messy. Second quarter offense was really good, but it's a team that's trying to figure things out, reestablish, figure out what their vibe is and how they're going to be successful. Kelly Olynyk was just such a vital part of that second unit. And then without Kelly Olynyk, the second unit doesn't really exist, so you adjust the first unit. Now the first unit's not the same, though the first unit was better last night than they have been in any other game.
David, you talk all the time about a team having 240 minutes that you have to come up with in any single game. It seems like since those trades, the Jazz are well short of that. Is there going to be any ready-made answer at any point down the stretch?
Oh, I think they're short now, right? And so what we were earlier this year was we had one top 100 player, top 30 player in Lowry, and then great depth all the way across. And, we got to replace really two rotation players in that we were playing 10 guys and you like to play 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to replace all the minutes of 3 guys. Does that make sense? And then if we're really perfectly honest about Ochai's last 20 games, it's not a huge replacement. I love Ochai and his energy and I think he'll be good. But for the last 20 games, I think we saw about 28% from the field and 17% from 3. So that should be okay. But you're right. Like the Taylor Horton Tucker now Taylor Hendricks minutes are replacing that, and so that was that's not the same thing.
Looking at it's been the big conversation. I know Justin Zanuck talked about it over the weekend that they didn't make any moves with the design of getting into the play-in or trying to get a top 10 pick or convey the pick or not convey the pick. In your big picture thought about it, what do you think makes the most sense? Is it to convey the pick? Is it not to convey the pick? Is it to add another top 10 pick to this roster? I mean, as you've thought about the strategy, what makes sense to you?
So I don't know. And you're probably smarter than me on this one, so I might just take your lead. But here's my one thought. So I know where we are right now, and I can go get a top 10 pick, right? Like kind of close.
Yeah.
Right? There's a way. It's within reach of getting a top 10 pick. I don't know what's going to happen next year. So, like we're protected. Still top 8 or still top 10?
Top 10.
Top 10, yeah.
Still top 10. So, like, if I don't want to talk if somebody got hurt, it was vital to the roster, and we were terrible, we are still protected next year. We turn out to be good, and we finish 16th, then they get a 16th pick, or we finish 14th, they get 16th pick. That seems better than giving them the 11th pick, right?
Absolutely.
So it seems to me at this point, it's beginning to get advantageous to get yourself into the top 10.
And as much as I think we try and say, this is a bad draft or this is a good draft, you don't hear anyone say he was a top 10 pick from a bad draft after they've been selected. Do you know what I mean? You still say, well, he was the number 7 pick in the draft, and that's who they're trading. You don't go back and actually look at whether that was a good draft or not. So if the Jazz were to pick somebody and you could trade the pick, or if you pick somebody and have them for a year and then try and trade him again, somebody would still sell themselves on the idea of, he was the number 6 pick. He's still got X amount of potential. And they kind of lose the idea of whether or not it's a good draft or not. That seems to matter less after the fact.
I don't really totally understand the concept of good or bad draft. I think it's defined by the top 5 picks. So Victor Wembanyama last year is a good draft. But if we're really honest, last year's draft was a good draft because of Victor Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson. And do you want to look what Scoot Henderson's shooting?
Right. Well, look at the Thompson twins.
And then,
look at Jarris Wallace isn't playing. Right. Look at Anthony Black's barely playing.
I personally didn't like last year's draft. I scouted it and didn't think it was very good because I think if you can't shoot, you can't play in our league. And I didn't think most of the guys could shoot. And the old guys that are in the draft that could shoot are playing great. Jaime Jaquez is the 3rd best player in the draft. I said this the other day. I have a hard time believing we can't find Jaime Jaquez in this draft. We can't find Braden Podziemski in this draft. The other one that I will forever, and this is really bad journalism and really bad analysis to have one life experience forever date how you look at things. But Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker, Joel Embiid, Aaron Gordon, Dante Exum was supposed to be the greatest draft. Marcus Smart, Nick Stauskas, I think, was 7th. Was supposed to be greatest draft ever. You were supposed to tank for Jabari Parker. 100% of Jazz fans would have lost 75 games if they could have gotten Jabari Parker.
Yeah.
And I remember watching the film on that and going, God, I don't know anything about basketball because I think Rodney Hood's better than Jabari Parker. I'd watched 5 Duke games and was like, this guy's better than Jabari Parker for the NBA. I must not know anything anymore. So I just don't buy it. I just don't buy the concept of good and bad drafts. Top-heavy, superstar, yes. When there's a LeBron or a Victor or a Joel Embiid, who should have gone one, obviously, like when you see those guys, it's obvious. Okay, there's not one of those this year. There's not. Okay, great. That's fine, because we weren't really planning to pick one. There was, thanks to Detroit, San Antonio, and Charlotte, there was zero chance we had a real good shot for that. Okay, now I'll take a top 10 pick, though. It's still a top 10 pick. And top 10 picks are great collateral because people will start to like players as we get closer.
Yes, they do. They always fall in love.
Well, and that I was going to bring up that point is that you talk about guys, you want guys who shoot in this league. And David, you mentioned the fact that the Jazz, they're not likely to be in that top 5. So can you find maybe somebody in the top 10? Yeah, maybe they're an older prospect, but they absolutely can shoot. And not everybody has to be a star coming out of the draft. You need role players. You talked about this with DJ and PK. I hear you talk about it all the time. You need role players to complement your stars on a team, and you absolutely can find those guys later on in the draft, even in that back half of the top 10.
Right. Now, like, I do think that there's something, like Justin Zanuck did something interesting that Draft Out shows is like 11 through 35 in the draft is about a 50-50 chance of getting a rotation player. After 35, it's pretty slim pickings. Now, I know Jokic, but it's pretty slim pickings after 35. But 11 through 35, the track record is 50-50 on getting a rotation player. It's also why, like, Indiana trading 3 first-round draft picks for Pascal Siakam, like, they gave away 1.5 rotation players. Yeah. Oh, that's a good trade. And, frankly, Minnesota and Cleveland made good trades with us for their side unless one of their unprotected picks moves into the top 10. Then they made a questionable trade. But if they all stay good and we draft between 15 and 30 on all 5 of our picks, guess what? That's a good trade by them. Good trade by us because the chance of getting that pick is worth it. But if Minnesota stays good this whole time and Cleveland stays good this whole time, those are good trades.
What does and this could come from a lot of different perspectives because Will Hardy's and Justin Zanuck's and Danny Ainge and the players might all have different opinions. What does a good post-All-Star break look like for the Jazz?
I'm going to go with 3 things. I'm going to preach a little from the Church of Will Hardy if I can.
Okay.
So, playing important competitive games for as many as possible. Not allowing to become numb to losing. And then if we're really honest, it's probably, and I hate doing this to the other guys, but it's probably mostly about Keontae, Taylor, and Walker. Maybe some more Lowry at the nail kind of stuff that you asked such a great question. You should play that answer today on the show, Ben, yesterday. Maybe it's a little bit more of Lowry developing individual positions on the floor to become a go-to guy. But I hate to say it, I do think at some point here, it's those 3 guys are the most important.
Now, David, Walker is a guy that PK's asked you this question. He was playing so little for quite a long stretch there of the season, but now with the trades, it looks like his role is going to expand. What really is, and I'm just using him as an example, you talk about those 3 that they want to develop. What is the next step for him in your mind in terms of his development?
I mean, I think it's just continuing to be a dominating defensive force is probably where most of his focus should be. Most people like to talk offense. There's something funny in this league that, like, Rudy Gobert is the best rim defender in the NBA, and Kristaps Porzingis is the second best rim defender in the NBA. And I'm sorry, can you tell me what place those 2 teams are in?
Yeah.
So we just, don't want to talk about that stuff for some reason, though it's actually pretty important. So I actually do think that that's still probably the most important. It is really, really hard to play in the NBA if you can't shoot. It's really hard. No matter what your size is, if you can't shoot, it's super hard to play NBA basketball and it's super hard for your team to play you. So one of the things Walker has to figure out is how to be a helpful offensive player despite the fact that he can't shoot.
Last question, David. What didn't happen at the at the trade deadline that surprised you? We know what did happen. Is there anything that didn't happen that you kind of think was a big picture thing or maybe a slight shift in the league?
I thought with the depth of free agency that we would see more players move. And I thought that specifically the Jazz, because I think they wanted to, that they were going to add a player that helped their roster down the road. I thought they would end up using some of their assets, but the world didn't play along. Like, that player just didn't. The only player who I think you can go back as a Jazz fan and say, should have we acquired, is OG Anunoby, because Pascal's a free agent. You can't do that. Unless you're going to tell me otherwise, P.J. Washington doesn't move my meter. I mean, I know, like, you'll laugh, but, like, I mean, for all the people who really want to make the playoffs, like, we should just trade for James Harden. Like, if you really want to make the playoffs, if we had James Harden, we'd make the playoffs. It's really good. But, you know, that's pretty short term. I don't think that's not what our front office is trying to do. But all the people that are clamoring for the playoffs, then you should have wanted to trade for James Harden. But the guys who moved were Harden, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, P.J. Washington. Am I missing anyone? I mean, Gordon doesn't really count.
Yeah, Daniel Gafford, whatever.
Right, Daniel Gafford. We don't need him. We have him.
Yeah.
So I was surprised that the world didn't line up for the Jazz, that they might get someone. And then if you look at OG Anunoby, who's the one player I do think you can kind of start playing that game with, they got R.J. Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly. They clearly, like, Masai Ujiri didn't want picks there. He knew he was getting picks for Siakam. He wanted players. Well, our comparable of R.J. Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly is Lauri Markkanen and Colin Sexton, and we weren't doing that for OG Anunoby. Right?
Yep.
I'm pretty certain we couldn't have done John Collins and maybe John Collins and Colin Sexton for OG Anunoby. I don't know if the numbers work. That would be the other, like, comparable, I guess. But I don't think that would have got it. I don't think that's going to get it done for R.J. Barrett and Emmanuel Quickly. So the world just didn't align. That's my surprise, is that the world didn't align for the Jazz to be able to bring in talent. Because I'm not surprised Kelly got moved. I'm not surprised Simone got moved. When a team with $60 million of cap space is calling you for one of your players, they're basically telling you, like, hey, we'll give you a early second round pick for him, or we're going to offer him a 4-year, $45 million offer sheet you're not going to match. And they're frankly saying, we'll give you a second round pick so we only have to offer him a 4-year, $32 million contract because there'll be no other bidders. So we're going to save ourselves $13 million by giving you a second round pick. That's what Detroit did, right?
Absolutely.
There's no other explanation why Detroit at $8 and $5 million would trade for Simone Fontecchio other than we're going to get him. We're just saving $12, $14 million to getting him now instead of later, and we'll pay a second round draft pick for it. So there's nothing. That's the only thing that happened is the world just didn't align that way for the Jazz. Otherwise, there was not a big surprise to me on things that took place.
All right, David, I've kept you longer than I promised. Appreciate you jumping on.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys. Have a great show today. Jay Catch, you the best. Hey, has this ever happened?
Probably not.
Not with you and us on the same show at the same time. I don't think so.
2 former broadcast assistants hosting a show together?
We've done this show together.
With me as a guest?
With you as a guest, I don't think so. So that's the first, I think.
All right, this is one of my happier days. Thank you. You just made my day. Someone asked me what the best thing to have in my day is. This is it. Thank you, guys. You're the best. I appreciate
David.
you. Proud of both of you.
See you, David.
There he is. David Locke, play-by-play voice of the Utah Jazz. Our conversation with David brought to you by Bucked Up. Real focus, unreal energy. Find them online, buckedup.com. Calm. Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the places where opportunities to improve your roster would have existed had external circumstances. Yeah. Like Miles Bridges was the type of guy who would improve your roster on a team that's pulling the plug to fall apart, and Miles Bridges beat up his girlfriend.
I was going to say, there's a certain legal situation that screwed that up.
So you don't want to touch that guy.
Yeah.
He's a bad guy. Yeah, so you don't bring him to Utah. But that's the type of guy who generally you would have gone after. And nobody touched him. And he said, hey, you know what? I want to hold on to my bird rights with the single team so you can pay me more than anyone else can.
Well, and Locke's right. They've tried to essentially, I don't want to say legislate, but like the free agency has died.
Yeah,
like,
it's not a thing anymore.
It's not really, because these teams have so much opportunity to retain talent, and like you mentioned, the bird rights and be able to pay so much more than other teams that really free agency doesn't exist as it used to. But he's right. I expected more movement. Teams wanting to jettison players because they're saying, you know what, this season's we're pushing all in on a rebuild here and we're moving. There wasn't as much movement. There's absolutely wasn't as much movement as I expected. And then I don't know what caused that, because you're right. You look at guys and like that OG Anunoby, he's right. That's a guy who can help you. James Harden, that's a guy who can help you. But beyond those guys, the parts that got moved, did they really move the meter?
We're also in a new place in the NBA, which I've never experienced in my life, because you've always been able to say by the All-Star break, there are 4 teams that can win a title this year.
Yeah, I would say you're right, yeah.
This year, the Boston Celtics think they can win a title. Minnesota thinks they can win a title. Mm-hmm. OKC doesn't maybe think they can win a title, but they're going to potentially finish with the best record in the West.
I was going to say they're going to be right there in the mix.
And they're not selling at the trade deadline. Cleveland knows they have to get out of the first round, so they're not selling at the trade deadline. They're buying. The Clippers think they can win a title. Denver knows they can win a title. The Bucks think they can win a title. The Knicks think they might be able to win a title. The Suns are championship or bust this year. Mm-hmm. The Pelicans are trying to figure out if this team with Zion, if he's healthy in the playoffs, can win a title. Philadelphia's trying to win a title, and Dallas is trying to win a title. I just named 12 teams that are the top 12 teams in the NBA. 9 of them legitimately think they can win a title.
Yeah.
3 of them don't get to sell, because if you sell, you're going to lose Donovan Mitchell in the offseason.
Well, and that's the thing about this. And all those teams made moves to try and bolster lineup to get themselves into that mix. You're right. It's going to be a more interesting playoff simply due to the fact that, the field of teams that have aspirations of coming out on top is bigger. And that'll add some intrigue to this. Is, okay, how are these teams going to approach this stretch run? Are you going to play hard, go 100%, try and get that top seed where you get the home court advantage? Or are you going to be one of those teams like, you know what, we're okay sitting back and being maybe that 3 or 4 seed where, we have the first round at home, but then we have to go on the road, and we don't mind that.
Denver doesn't mind.
I would say Denver's...
Jokic is going to win a game.
That's exactly what it is.
On your home court every single series, and so they just need to win all their games at home, which is what they do. They win all their games in Denver, especially in the playoffs. I think they lost 1 last year.
You're right.
And of those 12 I mentioned, there were 3 teams I still didn't mention who still have championship hopes: the Golden State Warriors, the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Miami Heat. I just listed off the 12 top teams in the league by record and didn't include those 3. So we're at 15 teams, which is half of the league. Mm-hmm. And then it was a little weird that a couple of these middle-tier teams, Chicago and Atlanta, didn't sell.
Yeah.
They probably should have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck realized is the Jazz are Chicago, the Jazz are Atlanta. They are good enough to compete for the play-in tournament, but the play-in tournament doesn't actually do anything for you. And while ownership in Chicago and ownership in Atlanta just wants to make the play-in to sell tickets over the last 25 games of the season, Ryan Smith has bigger aspirations than that. And honestly, Chicago and Atlanta doesn't. They don't have higher aspirations.
You'd like to think they do, but they don't.
When was the last time Jerry Reinsdorf did that with any of his teams? He doesn't do it with the White Sox. He's not doing it with the Bulls. He would love to get a draft pick that turns into an MVP in Derrick Rose, and then if it doesn't work out, he doesn't care.
And Atlanta is one of the teams in one of the biggest sports markets in the entire country, and people just don't care.
They're the 5th most important team in that.
And it's insane to me to think that, but that's what it is.
They've got an NFL team. Yeah. They have an NHL team. They have a great baseball team. Uh-huh. They have a
college football program that's 10 miles away.
Great college football program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So all of a sudden you're 5th.
Yeah. So you're right. The Jazz, you're right. They have bigger aspirations. They have a vision of what they want to accomplish. And yes, making the play-in tournament this year doesn't further that goal.
The Brooklyn Nets sold last year because they traded Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving.
Yes.
So they've already done their selling.
Mm-hmm.
They've got draft picks. They've got young players. They're trying to improve.
Correct.
Toronto Raptors did sell off. They sold off early in the season. They didn't necessarily sell off at the trade deadline, and the Jazz still found a way to make a deal with them. Memphis is having a bizarre off year because of Ja Morant and the injuries that they've had.
Yeah.
They're not going to sell. They're going to try and buy next year. Portland Trailblazers sold in the offseason when they got rid of both Damian Lillard and then Drew Holiday.
Correct.
Charlotte did sell off but couldn't even get rid of Miles Bridges, as we talked about. San Antonio is not selling. The Wizards kind of sold a little bit, and the Pistons sold for sure. But the Jazz didn't want to bring back Bojan Bogdanovic or Alec Burks. It was like, honestly, you can kind of look through and cross off all these teams, why they didn't get a deal done with the Jazz, and all of them make sense. And really the big hinge was that Miles Bridges is a domestic abuser, and you're not going to trade for that guy.
Yeah, he's got the red scarlet letter on him, and you can't touch that.
All right. When we come back, we're going to go through the rest of the Jazz schedule. How many games do we realistically think they can win? They're 3 games below 500 right now, and at what point could you see them maybe pulling the plug on the season if we're trying to determine whether or not they convey this pick or hold on to it? Stick around. More Jake and Ben coming up next. 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Whether it's the Jazz, Utes, Cougars, or Aggies, these guys have got you covered.
Trying to eat, fellas.
You're locked on to Jake Scott and Ben Anderson
1, 2, 3, move it.
on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Jake Hatch filling in for Jake Scott today. Hey, now's your chance to nominate the U Sports volunteer that you know for the Hercules Hero of the Week. Submit your nomination at kslsports.com/contests and listen every Thursday afternoon to JJ and Alex for the winner. Help us celebrate the efforts of those volunteers making an impact with the Hercules Hero of the Week, sponsored by Hercules Credit Union. Again, you can do that at kslsports.com/contests. It's a good thing to do if you have someone out there volunteering. You know, it's a pretty thankless job and helping kids. And
No doubt.
you and I both played youth sports, local sports. Those people who put in the work and don't make anything or don't make hardly anything.
Jeez, yeah.
It really goes a long way and, molds lives. So a good chance to do that. All right, Hatch, we talked about looking at the rest of the Utah Jazz schedule. I believe after last night, they have 27 games left.
27 to go, yeah.
Okay. Tonight against the Warriors, going into the All-Star break, I don't want to throw dirt on the Jazz before the game's played. That's why they play, but I would expect the Jazz are going to have another tough night.
It seems that way, Kate. So looking at the schedule here, Ben, just kind of at the outset, immediately post All-Star break, there is the softest portion of the remaining set of games for the Jazz.
Yes, there are.
Hornets, Spurs, Hawks, Wizards are there, not too far behind that.
Yeah.
I've got the sense that coming out of the All-Star break, if the Jazz are wanting to make a push, they're going to give us some false hope because they are going to beat up on lesser opponents like those. But then beyond that, yikes. Celtics, Hawks, Timberwolves back-to-back, Thunder, Mavericks twice, Rockets 3 times.
Yeah. Now, the Rockets are interesting because those games will determine whether or not the Rockets jump the Jazz in the standings.
Yes.
And the Rockets have been bad. The Rockets might be pulling the plug on the season and saying, we'd rather lose. We're going to play Amen Thompson as many minutes as possible, and Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks aren't going to play.
Then you also have road games in L.A. at the Warriors, home to Nuggets. You have Donovan Mitchell's return with the Cleveland Cavaliers in the mix there. So at the outset, and we can dig into this more deep, but I think if the Jazz, they may give Jazz fans some false hope with maybe a quick start out of the All-Star break, Ben. But after that lull, essentially, of those weaker teams, it's a really, really tough closing stretch here.
Jazz, as you mentioned, host Charlotte and host San Antonio the 22nd and the 25th. Jazz are better than both of those teams.
Yeah.
So you're playing at home. You're well rested. I think those are 2 wins. The Jazz get up to 28 wins on the season.
Okay.
You go at Atlanta. Atlanta's better than the Jazz. The truth is, Atlanta, I know the Jazz right now have a better record.
Sure.
But post-trade deadline, one of these teams has Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, and one of the teams doesn't. And as good as Lowry is, and Lowry's better than DeJounte Murray. I don't think he's better than Trae Young probably.
2 stars are better than 1 star.
Correct. And Atlanta's really trying to make the play-in tournament, as we talked about, and you're on the road. So that's a tough game. At Orlando. Orlando's better than the Jazz, and they're going to try and make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. Probably not a win.
Then you're at Miami.
Loss.
Washington,
you probably beat Washington here in Salt Lake City. Again, they are just a pretty dreadful team. I don't really know exactly what their plan is. Chicago, middling team, playing a lot better lately than their really slow start to the beginning of the year. One of the reasons they didn't make a trade at the deadline is they are starting to play better. Jazz should still win that game, though, at home. So you are maybe conservatively 4-3 coming out of the All-Star break, and you're thinking, okay, team's got a little momentum. At that point, they're only, I think, 2 games below 3 games below 500.
And let's add the caveat that this is us assuming the Jazz are coming out of the break really going for it.
Going for it.
They're properly motivated. They're rested. They're ready to roll. They've figured out some rotation issues. They've essentially solved all their issues they're dealing with right now.
And because I think Will Hardy, as David Locke said, wants to play meaningful games.
He does, yeah.
He wants to play games that are close, where the reps matter, the minutes matter. There's real fourth quarter minutes. Lauri Markkanen's getting a taste of what it's like to catch the ball at the nail with 3 minutes left in the game and make decisions that impact winning. Because if you're doing that again next year, it's going to be hard to make the playoffs. If you're doing that in game 40 next year, that's going to be difficult. And that will be part of it, but you have 25, 30 games here to give him a chance to really get a lot of those reps, so next year he's significantly better at it. So those are your first 7.
Yeah.
But then you're right. It becomes a murderer's row of who you're playing, especially on the road. So let's just do the road games starting March 9th through the end of the season. You go at Denver. You get a home stretch. You go at OKC. You go at Dallas. You go at Houston. Houston, again, we don't know what to expect, but those first 3 are very difficult. Come back. You go and play at Sacramento. They're fighting for playoff positioning. Come home for a game. You go at the Clippers. They're fighting for the top seed in the West. Then you play the Warriors, who are fighting with the Lakers to avoid the play-in tournament. Then you have 2 games at home. Then you come back and you go at the Clippers again, at the Warriors. They might be resting everybody because they've already got it locked up. Or if OKC, the Clippers, the Nuggets, and the Timberwolves are all fighting for the top seed, Clippers are playing their guys, especially if they feel like they have a chance to win a game against the Jazz, who might not be playing anybody. And then the Warriors, again, on the last game of the season, might be trying to be in the play-in tournament where they get to only have to win 1 game as opposed to having to win 2, and maybe you can even host that game.
Yeah.
Those are tough, in all honesty.
You could lose every one of those games.
You could lose every one of those games. I mean, the number of road games the Jazz win the rest of the season, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Like they might go 2-10.
That's 2-10. Yeah. Like that. This is looking like it is going to be a just tough deal for the Jazz to navigate this, because we've already talked about they've weakened this roster.
Yeah.
And to be able to hold up against this, because you're right, all these teams, Minnesota, they want nothing more than to be the top seed. They want to have that momentum going in. Well, you get them for back-to-back home games, Rudy Gobert coming back to Utah, they're going to want to beat the crap out of you.
Yeah, they are.
Like they're just like, okay, yeah, we're going to go pick up those 2 wins. But then you talk about the road games. Every one of those road games has a team that you look at that and you say they're motivated. They want that W, and they're looking at the Jazz saying, yeah, that's an easy win for us.
So if you go 2-10 on the road the rest of the way, you are sitting at 39 losses and 28 wins. So if you want to get to 500, which is what I think it's going to take in the West to get to the 10th seed or higher, because right now the Golden State Warriors are the 10th seed and they're sitting at 500, and I don't expect them to finish the season below 500.
They're going to push, yeah.
Means you have to win 13 games, 13 of your final 15 at home. I think that's what you have. I think you have 15 games left at home. And let's look at their home games now after just doing the road games. Warriors tonight, that's a tough one. We talked about you can beat Charlotte, San Antonio, Washington, and Chicago. So you've got 4 of your 13.
Okay.
Then the question is, can you get 9 more between Boston? Probably not. Atlanta, maybe. Can you conservatively or maybe optimistically split the Minnesota home?
That's the thought.
Okay,
yeah.
so that's what? You've got 6 wins now?
Uh-huh.
Dallas, tough. San Antonio should be a win. Houston's a win. It's 8. Cleveland, Donovan Mitchell comes back. They're playing as good as anybody since January 1st. Probably not. Denver, probably not. Houston, probably. I mean, you're right there around 9 wins.
So
I said you had to get 13 of 15. Like, that's the problem. Even if you're optimistic, like you're beating some of these Minnesota teams, you don't drop a bad game to Houston or San Antonio and Salt Lake City. You know, you don't have an off shooting night and Victor Wembanyama goes crazy. I still think the Jazz are probably about 9 wins at home and 2 games on the road. That gives them 11 more wins on the season, which gets them to 37 on the year.
And you're probably finishing 11th or 12th.
Yeah.
The math very clearly says, okay, maybe they were right to try and pick up assets at the trade deadline, maybe kind of reading the tea leaves and saying, okay, yeah, all these other teams, they're pushing for it. They got better rosters than us. They have what they have their marching orders they need. They need to make this. We don't have to in this circumstance right now. So you know what? Maybe we take a step back just a little bit here. And as Locke pointed out a little bit earlier on, top 10 pick. You have a major injury. Guess what? You're covered in that circumstance.
Next year, if Lowry gets hurt next year.
You have something.
You're still a top 10 team, and you don't have to convey your pick to the Thunder. It never actually becomes unprotected.
Correct.
That's actually where, again, protection comes in that sense. If you have a disastrous year, a la the Memphis Grizzlies this season,
just look at what Memphis did.
You don't lose your pick.
Yeah.
So there's the value there for the Jazz. And then when you have all these unprotected picks from other teams, you do sadly hope that they have some bizarre season where it all falls apart, or they trade everybody, or they just collapse because of injuries or whatever, and you get one of their top 10 picks. But you look at it for the Jazz. The math we just did, I put them at about 37 wins on the year if everything goes as expected, which it never does in the NBA. And then the question becomes, A, what does the 10th seed finish with in the West? So how far back are you? And then B, would having Kelly Olynyk and Simone Fontecchio, and I'm not going to put Ochai in this conversation because he's already only playing 5 minutes for the Toronto Raptors. Like, he didn't play hardly at all last night. Do Kelly Olynyk and Simone Fontecchio on the roster make up for those 6 or 7 wins? Maybe they do. I think that's the question. I kind of doubt it myself, but maybe they do. And then was that worth a first round pick and an early second round pick?
That's the thing. That's the kind of the trade off you're examining here. I don't think those two are the difference for 6-7 wins. That's
over a 27 win period. That's a lot.
That's a lot, and those two, they don't equal that in my mind. So therefore, yes, that first round pick, and I know that it's a second round pick, but as Locke said, it's in the top 35. There's their clear delineation of when the picks are worthless, quote unquote. That they picked up 2 picks that, in theory, should have, as Locke said, a 50-50 proposition of being a rotation piece for you.
Yeah. So, it's and they were going to lose those guys in the offseason. That's the other thing, that they were going to walk in the offseason. So you get an 83rd game by making the play-in tournament. Maybe if you keep them, you don't get the 32nd pick. You don't get another first-round pick, which is probably going to be late, 28, 29, somewhere in that range.
But it's an asset.
And then you lose the players anyways, but you do get the 83rd game. I'm just walking through the math that I'm guessing Danny Ainge and Justin Zanuck did. And in addition to that, you probably add a top 10 pick this year because you fall under the protection. You keep your pick. You don't convey it to OKC. And then I think the Jazz do have to be smart and have to make the playoffs next year, or have to finish and convey their pick, because if you don't convey the pick in 2025, you run yourself a very dangerous risk in 2026 that if, let's say, when you do have swap rights with the picks for the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Minnesota Timberwolves, meaning even if they finish the number 1 overall pick and you have the 30th pick, you just say, no, we get to swap picks with you. Yeah. That's part of the Donovan Mitchell and the Rudy Gobert trades. If you haven't paid off your pick yet to the Oklahoma City Thunder and you're picking 30th and the Timberwolves are picking first or the Cavs are picking first, you can't swap because that 30th pick goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder.
That's
the big danger.
Yeah.
So I think next year you really have to invest to push your team over the top, to at the very least convey the pick.
Well, see, the way you lay that out, Ben, it's almost genius in a way. Does that make sense? Like it's okay, we're sacrificing now for a push next year, which also protects us for the future as well.
Yeah, it's truly one step back, 2 steps forward.
Yeah, and I actually think it's, thinking about it and the way you kind of lay it out, it's the genius of what a front office has to do. They have to have that 30,000-foot view. We all know that coaches are so myopic. They're coaching here and now, day in, day out. I got to win this game. Whereas the front office, they're like, no, we're looking years down the line. Yep. And as that kind of lays out, and there's variables to all of this.
Sure.
But right now, it looks like, it's a step back in the interim. But the whole thought is you're taking 2 or 3 steps forward pretty quickly relative.
Take a step back for 25 games this year. Try and take a major leap forward next year by investing in the roster with all the money you have. You renegotiate and extend Lowry market in this offseason, which is the plan. Mm-hmm. You add talent around the fringes. You get some players to come and replace Kelly Olynyk, replace Simone Fontecchio, Keontae George.
Piece to a guy like Lowry potentially.
Yeah. And then Walker, Keontae, maybe Taylor. Maybe it's too early for him. These guys take a step forward, and all of a sudden it's easy to make the play-in or get the 8th seed even, and maybe even 6th seed and get to the postseason. then you convey your pick, and then you still have your draft swap rights in 2026. I think that's the plan. That would be my guess for the Utah Jazz.
It seems like the best plan considering the circumstances.
But as we know, the best laid plans
yeah,
often for naught. So we will see if the Jazz can pull it off. They are trying to thread a needle a bit. All right, we'll wrap up the show. Coming up next, stick around. Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
The sports you love, the teams you can't live without.
Get a sense of urgency!
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. The segment brought to you by Peach Doors and Windows. Peach Doors and Windows is Utah's premier window and door retailer, combining beauty and technology on windows and doors since 1993. Call them today for your free in-home estimate, 801-566-1255. Only 3 games tonight on the NBA ledger. And then we get into the All-Star break. You, where are you? You're a big-time sports fan. Like, you're a huge sports fan. Where are you on the All-Star game? Because I have such a bad judgment for it because I cover it. Yeah. I cover the NBA all the time, so it feels important to me, and I don't know where it registers for people.
Growing up, Saturday night with the dunk contest was my All-Star event that I to this day, there's still a nostalgia factor. Mm-hmm. Now, the field of this year's dunk contest is less than thrilling, but those usually seem to deliver sometimes the best competitions of those. The All-Star game itself, I enjoy it. I will watch it, and part of it is required with what we do here in this industry and doing in sports radio. It is fun to see the best collection of NBA talent on the same court together, doing some crazy things. I know that they don't play defense. I know that it's a exhibition, and that's a kind of a loose term to term it. It's still worth watching. I don't try and draw anything significant from it, which you shouldn't do. Let's be honest, everybody out there. But yeah, I enjoy it, and it's just part of my whole ethos is just being a sports guy.
Tomorrow night, Friday, honestly, probably the worst night. The play-in tournament
or the celebrity game tomorrow.
Yeah, probably the celebrity game too.
I watched the celebrity game just to see who shows up, like who's there at the celebrity game. I don't actually watch the actual game. I just want to see who actually is thinking that they can go out there and ball.
Saturday night's fun because it is a big production. And it's actually, I will tell you honestly, if you didn't go last year, it's so much better on TV than it is in person.
I was in Southern California while it was going on.
It doesn't make any sense when you're there in person. Like, there's these weird gaps, and obviously you can't hear what they're saying on TNT in between the events, so it's just kind of bogged down and slow, and like they fill it with music performances, and that's kind of cool. Like, they always have someone. When I was in Chicago, they had Common, and they had Chance the Rapper, and they had Shaka Khan, I think. Like
Shaka Khan,
like people with Chicago ties, and obviously Jewel was here last year. And so it's interesting, but it's far more interesting on TV, I think, especially Saturday night. I like the three-point contest. I think that translates the best. And especially because the NBA is so much about threes now, though, I guess maybe it's lost a little bit of value. Where in the past, like, guys didn't shoot threes a whole lot. So it was kind of cool to be like, well, what happens when this guy takes 30 in a row? How many is he going to make? Now you see guys take 15 in a game, and it's not all that spectacular of an accomplishment.
Well, there's that whole stat that like there have been single games that have outdone entire seasons worth of threes for teams back in like the 80s.
Yeah,
which it's incredible to consider that because you would have thought that like somebody would have thought, you know what, three's worth more than two, and if we develop that as a skill, maybe we can be better. Like you would have thought, but you know what, groupthink exists in pro sports very heavily. But yeah, we are going to get the Steph Curry, Sabrina Ionescu head-to-head showdown,
which would be great.
I look forward to that one.
Yeah, that'll be cool. And they're doing it from the three-point range, like the NBA three-point range.
Like,
Sabrina is stepping
out. Yeah,
good for her.
I look forward to that. That alone, I'm going to watch more closely because I just want to see how she does.
And I hope we get more stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Hans and Scotty coming up next. Stick around. Thank you, Sarah. It's Jake and Ben, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.